The oil and gas company presence in Canada is still quite strong, and that's linked to our banking sector. About 1 in 5 board directors of the Canadian Big Five banks have a link to the fossil fuel industry. So that shows the entrenchment in the status quo.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Move the Money series. We are interviewing interesting people that are moving the money into the right direction. We're also interviewing institutions and finance companies that maybe are not moving money fast enough yet to hear how they are thinking. And we're also interviewing a lot of interesting non-profit organizations and advocates for how we can get things moving faster. This episode, I'm very proud to present Julia Segal from Climate Finance and the Environmental Defense Canada. Please introduce yourself to the audience. What do you do, and what is your organization's role in the transition?
Hi, everyone. Delighted to be here with you today to talk about how we move the money for climate action. My work focuses on policy and regulation for the financial sector to align with climate change, which hasn't always been considered the snappiest of subjects, financial regulation, but a lot of my work aims to highlight why it's so important. I used to work in investments, proper in sustainable finance, and then moved to sustainable finance policy because I recognized this was such an important piece of achieving our climate targets and maintaining a safer world. Environmental Defense Canada is a leading Canadian nonprofit, and we tend to look at climate and environmental issues and think about what policy solutions can we help deliver to get us towards where we need to go.
I'm also, my own background is also from the finance industry, actually. So that was what I was doing 15 years before I found that we don't have time. 7 years now, so times are flying. What do you see as the biggest difference being on the other side, not working in finance, but still working with finance? What do you see as the biggest difference? Is it easier to make an impact when you're not in the industry, or how do you see the difference?
I find at this point in time, we need climate experts who are looking at finance to a much higher extent than there has been in the past. That movement's definitely growing, of professionals like you and I, Ingmar, as well as others who bring climate and scientific expertise and recognize the financial sector as sure an opportunity, but also currently a problem that needs to be fixed. When I was working in finance, I was quite fortunate to have a proper impact investing mandate. I was investing in Indigenous-owned renewable energy, very, very cool and climate-aligned projects. But what shifted for me was that I recognized even if that portfolio of investments was flawless when it came to climate and social impact, the rest of the financial system was still oriented in the wrong direction. So absolutely, people within the financial sector, sustainable finance professionals, should be pushing for climate-aligned investments and climate-aligned policy. At the same time, they're limited by organizational mandates. They're working within rules for finance that need to be fixed. So people on the outside who are working on policy solutions or advocacy solutions can go a step forward to say, hey, the rules that everyone else in the financial sector is working in needs to be modernized and updated so we can be a bit more vocal and honest about what those solutions are.
It's hard to criticize the system when you're depending on the system.
Exactly.
It's actually my same journey. I think working in finance is a very good place to be in order to move things in the right direction. But if you have the ambition to change the operating system, I think the only way to do it is some crazy people like you and me step outside there and try to achieve it. So in Canada, there's something called Climate Aligned Finance Act. Can you tell us about what that is all about and how it works?
The Climate Aligned Finance Act is the perfect example of really changing and modernizing and fixing the way our financial system works. For a bit of context first, geographically, in Canada, we are so far behind on aligning finance with our climate commitments. We don't have the same policy environment that the UK or the EU does for net zero financial systems, or to include finance in part of our climate commitments formally in the government. So we're starting from behind, and maybe as a result, maybe as a cause, you could tell me your opinion. Our financial institutions, our large banks, for example, are some of the largest investors in fossil fuels globally, and they statistically underinvest in clean energy relative to what they're investing in fossil fuels. So particularly in Canada, the financial sector is still a problem when it comes to climate action, at large at the summary level. The Climate Aligned Finance Act is a really amazing piece of policy led by Senator Rosa Galvez, who I've had the pleasure of working with, which would totally modernize our financial system to align with climate action. So the best way to put this, as I'm talking about financial policy, is that it's changing the rules of the game so that it actually works for positive investments that are productive and make us climate resilient. A couple of the specifics on this bill: it would, upgrade regulators' responsibilities so that they can think about not just, financial stability in the abstract, but what does that mean for how you're investing in climate? What's your impact on climate? Do all of these banks and pension plans have plans to invest in climate resilience and mitigation? So it takes the big vision and then makes it specific in a way that is absolutely inspiring for moving the money.
And is this act implemented, or is it just suggested? Where's the status right now?
That's the key questioning, where still in the process. This is going through the Canadian Senate, and I just had the opportunity to testify to the Senate about this bill last week. So still in the process, still very active. It was introduced about 2 years ago, and it was pretty amazing. On the 2-year anniversary birthday of this bill, a number of global experts came out with videos talking about how globally inspiring this bill is, how important it is for Canada to implement it, since we haven't yet.
Are you optimistic that it will pass?
Let's just say the bill would be so effective at transitioning finance away from polluting investments into clean investments that the status quo institutions aren't thrilled with what it could change.
So what you're saying is that it's going to be met with heavy resistance, and it's going to be
absolutely. I think when you shake things up to the degree that they need to be shaken up right now, there are some players, like, for example, oil and gas companies who remain politically influential in Canada, who don't like to see that change.
No, I can imagine. And your role in this is your organization is it your proposal, or have you influenced this, or how is you connected with it?
Senator Rosa Galvez is an independent senator. She introduced the bill. We have been working with her from early on to help demonstrate interest and support for this bill. Senate bills aren't typically something that garner great attention, but with this one, it's had over hundreds of endorsers from organizations globally and in Canada, as well as academics, and 6,000 people wrote to the Senate saying that they're interested in the bill. I also had the pleasure of being an advisor on this bill when Senator Galvez was drafting it, among others. And that's another piece. I love to look at the process of policy as well as the outcome. And this bill worked with global experts, so very consultative to make sure it was well informed, and thought about global best practice and how we can right size that for Canada. So a bit of a nerdier side, but the process and governance behind our solutions, I always find, affects the output. So that's a nice piece of it too.
And you mentioned that this will it will create winners and losers, and some of the losers maybe are the existing banks that are very profitable on just not changing in short term at least, and all the companies they are lending the money to, of course. Do you talked about that it's a lot of resistance. How do you feel that more than, or is it happening more things than just commenting on TV news, etc.? Is it ugly?
The key point in my mind is that moving towards a green economy will create better opportunities for people across Canada, for people across the world at large, right? In Canada, for example, energy bills would be lower on renewable energy. There are more job opportunities in renewable energy. So when we're talking about a framing of, what's the impact of this and who benefits, the majority of people in the country benefit from climate action. I think everyone in this audience, in this space, understands that. And that's why we're all working to deliver climate action, because it makes life better for people around the world. Shaking things up, though, at the level of our financial institution will just change the way things work a little bit. As I mentioned, the oil and gas company presence in Canada is still quite strong, and that's linked to our banking sector. About 1 in 5 board directors of the Canadian Big Five banks have a link to the fossil fuel industry. So that shows the entrenchment in the status quo, right? So I wouldn't consider that there's going to be any necessarily losers in this change. It's just going to be a shift of the way things work. And if someone's digging their heels in to say, let's keep the status quo, I mean, that's not the way that we can solve these problems.
No. It's interesting you say that the banks have, the financial institutions have direct links to the fossil fuel industry. I often talk about BlackRock as an example. They had this very high profile, at least a few years back, when Larry Flink sent this letter to all the companies they have invested in. And it's basically all companies publicly traded in the world, because there's the largest investor, where they say that, or he say that you must focus on climate. You need to go sustainable, focus on that, etc. And if you don't do that, we maybe are going to sell your de-invest. Now he's not talking as much as ESG, because it has become a counter movement to ESG. But still, BlackRock has gained a lot of traction, and a lot of institutions are investing their money into BlackRock funds because they see that they are somehow pushing the green finance. But if you start looking under the hood here, you see that BlackRock are doing themselves, they're heavy fossil fuel investors, exactly like the Canadian banks. And last year, they announced Saudi Aramco Oil CEO as their independent board director. Did you know about this?
Yes, I think I've seen that in the trajectory of BlackRock, from being very vocal about saying we're going to help lead on the green transition, to then acting as if their hands are tied. To me, that shows why these voluntary commitments from financial institutions, whether it's an asset manager like BlackRock or a big bank, simply aren't going to get us where we need to go. Almost, the majority of companies globally, of publicly listed companies, have net zero targets for 2050, but they don't have plans to back that up, right? So it's not only that they're off track from their plans, most of them don't even have plans to deliver that high level commitment of saying we are going to be climate aligned and help get to a safe planet. How? Don't ask us, right? And that's particularly acute for banks and other financial institutions. In Canada, all of the big five banks committed to net zero by 2050, but they haven't taken the commensurate action. As I mentioned, they are the largest financiers of fossil fuel globally, among the largest 10. And it's the piece that's tricky about these voluntary commitments is they're fickle, right? Policy, as we talked about, should be and often is consultative, follows a process, is democratic. Whereas, for example, the Bank of Montreal, who is one of Canada's big five banks, BMO, who made a commitment to achieve net zero, just last month revoked its anti-coal lending policy because it was worried about the ESG pushback, for example. So it shows that that commitment that they're making and selling products off of likely is fickle, and the rules of the game need to be changed to make sure that the banks and pension funds who are managing our money are actually investing in ways that are socially and environmentally productive, not just, profitable for the next quarter.
I totally agree. So we need rules and regulation. I mean, why should it be legal to invest in something destroying the future? I mean, banking industry, you have so many regulation about what banks are allowed to do not to take too big risk, right? So they are used to be regulated, and it's a big risk in investing in the destruction of the planet. That will not be a very profitable business idea if you're a little bit long-term investor. But the problem, or I will say the big question always in this area is how. How can we make this happen? You mentioned that it will be a close call to get this Climate Aligned Finance Act to be approved, and it will meet resistance from the ones that don't want to change. How can we build enough support for those regulations? Because what we see now all over, everywhere in Europe, in North America, and I mean the whole world is to see that political are moving into climate denialism. They're backing down from regulation, changing them. How can we fix that? How can we get our regulation to really be stronger, be better, and don't get those political setbacks where you have some new political leaders that are canceling what the old ones did?
Most people remain keen for the government to do more to address climate change.
Yeah.
And this includes modernizing financial policy. Globally, a number of politicians are trying to scapegoat problems in a way to elevate their own profile or party's profile without offering solutions that actually make life better for people or address those core problems. But despite that, most people remain keen for the government to do more on climate action because people are being affected by it negatively. Here in Canada, over 40% of people were affected by wildfires, which is something that I never thought I would experience and never have before 2 years ago. Of course, the kind of people living across the global south have been experiencing that for years. So we need political leadership to not cave to the short term, just like we need new rules so financial institutions are not caving to the short term. Ingmar, one thing that desperately surprised me as someone who is evidently passionate and excited about financial policy, I live my life on the assumption most people don't think about that too often. I was baffled that in recent polling, over 2/3 of people across Canada want new rules for sustainable finance. And that rises to just under 80% if it's framed as addressing greenwashing, which is not surprising, actually, given that banks, for example, are making promises they aren't keeping. Yeah. So the interest in these solutions exists from people. Politicians, by nature of their role, have a responsibility to design policies that show people it's making life better for them.
But I think this is very, I mean, I agree with you. I also see that in a lot of surveys, many people, the majority of citizens, they want stronger regulations. A majority of businesses also want stronger regulations. It's not like people against business. And a lot of financial institutions, they are not against more greener regulation because it will be a level play field for everyone. Not everyone, of course, but I mean the broader majority, you have the support. But still, it's not those politicians that are gaining voters. I mean, people want regulation, but they vote for politicians that are not implementing them. Many times doing the opposite, drilling more oil, like you do in your country. Mine country, Sweden, we don't have oil, but we lower the tax on fuel and aviation instead. And those are the ones getting most votes. So how come that we have this political system where you have a growing support for climate regulation? I mean, not all climate regulation, but overall, I mean, the support are growing, awareness are growing, but still the popular politicians winning the election are often walking in the other direction. I don't understand the logic behind this. I mean, I have some theories, but I would love to hear your thoughts on it, and if you agree on my view.
There's such a juncture between what people want to see in the politicians who are rising. Absolutely. I think it's always hard to address a problem head on, and that's not necessarily being done sufficiently on climate. I think a lot of the politicians who should be leading on building a more sustainable and safer environment are getting a bit spooked by that trend you're mentioning and not maintaining the level of ambition that's required to be inspiring, frankly. That's my personal perspective. I think instead of meeting the level of political delivery that needs to be actioned to keep these types of policies inspiring and comforting and safe for people, the politicians who should be leading sometimes lower the bar and play on the opposition playing field, which isn't something that should be done, right? Instead of sticking to what they're advocating for, they turn into responsive mode and a fearful mode of seeing those negative trends that you highlighted. I also appreciate what you raised about a uniform perspective from so many different segments of society who want to see stronger regulation. Again, not historically a call, or not what you see as a call historically, where businesses want new rules, bankers want new rules, finance wants new rules for themselves. It's almost a trope that the private sector is assumed to not want rules on itself. But particularly, what I've seen across jurisdictions, there has been a lot of leadership from organizations who want to level the playing field and ensure that they have a better space to operate in. I think those policies are really needed for businesses to deliver on their promises. Absolutely. A lot of colleagues will talk about that as an ambition loop where government can set, high targets, high climate action, and then businesses have to meet and exceed that. And ideally they're lobbying for things that are advancing climate action instead of holding it back. So I think that's one really important piece, is to have both transparency and aligned momentum from different segments of society, to be moving together for those policies that we need to see, so that there isn't even the opportunity for a politician to act as if there are winners and losers that they're trying to address, right?
Yeah.
I need to hear some of your theories that you alluded to as well, because this is this is a thorny year for that conversation with a number of elections globally.
I think it's many things, but one way I see it is that unfortunately our political leadership are more governed by where they receive money from and lobbyists, and not so much what people really think. And if you have enough money in many countries, even if they are good democracies, if you get a budget, you can win an election because you have the campaign budget to do it. And you're loyal to those giving you the money more than those giving you the vote, because if you have enough money, you can always be good at communicating a couple of weeks before election, and you can win that election. It's always a close call. So I think lobbying and the influence of fossil fuel interest and other interests that are not thinking of everyone is too high. So the way it's not the only problem, but it is a problem as I see. It's also a money problem. Money is going into influence the political to help you instead of helping the society. The way we don't have time are working on this is that we have launched this new campaign together with UNDP and the Non-Fossil Fuel Proliferation Treaty and some others. And Move the Money is about creating awareness around this debate where have got stuck a little bit, where you have should an institution invest in fossil fuel? Is it better to be invested and be an active owner, or should I divest? What we try to add to this is that debate is a little bit over because we need the money in the solutions. So instead of having them in oil, we need to move them to the solutions. And I talk to many pension asset managers that don't agree with me. And they always say that, yeah, but if we sell our shares in fossil fuel industry, someone else will buy it, always, because you have a market depth. That's true. Someone else will buy them. But someone else will not buy the solutions. So we need the good, or I mean, the mainstream finance institutions to move their money to the solutions, because that will give more money to the solutions. And if we're helping the solutions, we will sooner or later not need oil. So that's what we see. And this is a message that seems to be quite easy to understand, because if you look at numbers, it looks crazy. You have all those fossil fuel subsidies. You have pension funds investing trillions. Why? I mean, not many people want them to be invested here. Most people see a logic behind that we need to funnel the money into the solutions, etc. But we try to do something else with this campaign. And it's very hard, so we will see how long it takes until we succeed. But today it's a lot of banks and financial institutions. Some are doing better, some are doing worse. You have a lot of, I mean, you mentioned some voluntary initiatives that companies are backing down from, but still you have some banks and financial institutions really trying, doing the right thing. They can always improve, but they really try to do the right thing, and some are really doing good and not backing down from their policy, etc. But those banks are not getting enough advantage. I mean, they get some people maybe wants to work for them. They maybe are getting their client not move away from them, but they're not growing because of this. So what we try to do here is that we try to help those players that are doing the right thing and get the people to move the money to them. Because what I see, if we can get a mass movement behind this, all those people you said want tougher regulations, etc. If we can get them to actually move the money away from the fossil fuel investors to those that are not investing in fossil fuel and into solutions instead, I think it will be a very quick move. I mean, it will scare the hell out of those banks not changing fast enough, because they don't want to lose clients. So we don't need to move all the money. We maybe need to move like a couple of % of the market. And I think many banks will say that we also need to implement policies. We also want to push for a regulation, because what we have seen with regulation is that if you don't have the players going in doing it, like Tesla, you will not get regulation around electric cars. So we need to help the banking Teslas in order to get the regulation to happen. In order to get that happen, we need to mobilize the people and the business, because businesses have a lot of banking, cash saving banks. How do you see this strategy? Do you think it will work?
I appreciate your perspective that lobbying from oil and gas companies in particular is keeping us from succeeding on the climate policies that we need to see. That goes back to the piece about transparency, right? A lot of organizations might be putting forward a positive front with their net zero by 2050 commitment, but perhaps, behind the scenes in the government office buildings, saying something very, very different and putting money towards politicians who are saying things that are very, very different, right? Maybe a company is saying publicly that they're investing in a just transition, yet behind the scenes are lobbying against just transition legislation.
Yeah.
So this goes back to, the core question of money being power, which I think is at the root of your initiative with Move the Money, right? You're trying to frame money towards solutions, which then empowers those solutions and disempowers the organizations and activities that are the fundamental scientific problem for climate change.
Exactly.
One really super example that I am just about obsessed with here in Canada, we have a Canada Healthy Food Guide. It shows what food should you be eating for a healthy diet.
Yeah.
A separate policy conversation, but they updated that a few years ago and changed the lobbying processes around it so that everything had to be deeply transparent. The results were so different. Instead of recommending a glass of processed juice, you got recommended an apple, right? It was absolutely an outstanding case study in the impacts of corporate lobbying and how that affects policy and how it can undermine the integrity of the recommendations, or if you limit lobbying, if you limit secret lobbying and make sure that there's equal representation from all different stakeholders and interest groups, you get policy that actually aligns with facts and what's in the best interest of the population that you're governing on behalf of. So that's something that we desperately need to see. Here at Environmental Defense, we created a lobbying tracker for the oil and gas companies on Twitter, which shows every single meeting that one of these institutions have with elected officials and members of government. And let me tell you, it's a busy, busy tracker. There's a lot of output there. And an interesting piece going back to the Climate Aligned Finance Act was that the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, exactly what it sounds like, an industry association for the oil and gas companies, lobbied on the bill. And I assume those conversations weren't in support of the Climate Aligned Finance Act or rules to align our financial system with climate in general. So when we're talking about empowering solutions to help fix this, or moving money away from the areas and industries that are contributing to causing climate change and perhaps, sticking their foot in the way of climate progress, absolutely shifting the money is such a key area here. And fixing the rules of the game, modernizing financial policy is what I see as a key point that needs that transparency to get to that solution, but then is also a solution in itself, where if we have more government rules and clarity over how our financial system is working, that, top level of money is power, then we're bringing back into the hands of more democratic means what's getting funded, what's our economy like tomorrow. And I think that's really the underlining piece that's so important, is to get that greater democratic accountability over where money's going, so that we don't have to do these challenging ways to get progress, and things are more transparently moving in the direction that they should be in the best interest of more people.
I agree. What we have created on We Don't Have Time, you can see the address below us here, is wedon'time.org, Move the Money. And if you sign up to that campaign, we give you a concrete step-by-step guide on how you can research how much fossil fuel your money are invested today. We have that data. We're working together with Urgewald that have 7,000 companies. They have data about how much fossil fuel they're invested in. So we have that data, but we also have data about if companies are stepping away from their climate ambition. It's more and more financial companies leaving Race to Zero and Nets Alliance, etc., etc. And there is some companies moving on the right direction, where they actually see the data that they have a lot of money invested in fossil fuel, but recently they have changed the policy. So next year they're probably not going to have that much money seen. So this is a great guide that can help everyone, from individuals to companies, to lower their emission from their banking account. And many times, as you probably know, the financial carbon footprint can be as high as everything else, and it doesn't.
Often the highest part of a person's carbon
Yeah,
footprint.
and it's so simple. I mean, we need to change so many things: how we eat, how we transport, what we do, and what we buy. But let's start with the banking account. It's a couple of phone calls and maybe a meeting. So it's so easy to do it, and if you do it many times, you can find investment that actually pays better dividend. So you can make some money out of it as well, and hedge the risk into moving the money into an industry that we have agreed to transition away from. I have one last question for you, and it's quite a serious question actually. So I want you to answer it as honest as you can, and that is, do you really believe that we're going to make it and solve the environment crisis and planetary crisis for him?
That is a serious question. I always find it tough to answer questions about belief, and I think you'll hear this more and more often from people working in this space, because it's entirely changeable, right? For me, I don't know if that's so much the question as whether I still feel confident that working to solve this problem is worthwhile.
Yeah.
And to that, absolutely. Let's say maybe there are two types of people out there. There's people who are working to make just one extra dollar, and then there's people who are working to shave even an increment of a degree off of global warming. And so do I still believe it's worthwhile to spend very much time working to shave an increment off of a degree off of global warming? Absolutely. Do I believe that it's worthwhile to engage on policies that would make life better for people, even at a time when the global trajectory is moving away, not just from climate policy, but potentially democracies? Absolutely. I believe that's worthwhile. So the destination changes based on whether or not we keep working for it. And I think believing that destination's worthwhile is more important to me than wondering whether or not we can get there.
Yeah. I think
How do you feel?
I think you put it in a very good way. I mean, it's a depressing time, so it's hard to be always optimistic. But for me, it's very much not doing everything you can to try to change things will be to give up. And giving up will be to give up on everyone else, the people you love and people that are dependent on you, and also yourself. And I think that what I'm most worried about actually is not that the climate crisis will play out and devastate everything. So that, I mean, the whole planet are burning or something like that. That can happen. But what I'm worrying about is that we as society are starting to give up and just being passive, can't do anything about it, and don't even try anymore. That is a very dystopian world. If we stop trying, I don't want to live in that world. So that's why I'm trying and keep trying. And I believe that we can make it if we actually are more doing it. So we need more people, and everyone can join this movement. You just need to move the money. So thank you so much, Judy. And I really hope that you will succeed with this Climate Aligned Finance Act. And if our reader wants to read more about it, maybe you can provide a link and we can put it down here so people can see what it is all about, and hopefully it's something that can be spread to other countries, like my home country, Sweden. Our pension funds, maybe we have better rules than Canada, but 5 million, half of the Swedish population are right now investing in Saudi oil through our state-owned 87 fund. That was the first episode in this series, and I can really recommend to watch how they are thinking. I don't agree with them, but I do believe that we need to take those conversations with the people we don't agree with to move things in the right direction as well.
Ingmar, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you. Can absolutely share some reading about the Climate Aligned Finance Act and genuinely invite people, organizations to get in touch if you're keen to learn more about this. Please feel free to reach out to me. And this is such an important policy to absolutely help spread globally and drive financial policy for climate action. I always think of financial policy as I said, something people might not think about as the first climate tool, but financial policy is climate policy, which is public policy. And it's something that I'm so thrilled to be working on, and invite all who see this as an important solution to join in that.
Good luck. I'm really hope that you will have that act happening soon.
We'll have another chat when it's passed through. How about
Absolutely.
that?
We will.
That's
Thank you
great.
so much.
Thanks.
Bye.